There are things happening to you that no one else seems to understand. You notice patterns that feel deliberate, dreams that arrive like instructions, or a quiet voice that insists on paradox instead of easy answers. You are not losing your mind. Carl Gustav Jung devoted his life to these exact anomalies and concluded something radical. They are not symptoms of breakdown, they are signs of a widening consciousness. Today, I will introduce you to 5 experiences that reveal when the psyche is opening up and what each signal asks of you in order to live with more integrity and less fear. If any of this sounds familiar, know this is not an accusation of weakness. It is a validation. The opening activates dormant psychological functions the culture usually ignores, like the transcendent ability to hold opposites, the faculty Jung named the transcendent function, and a relational field that Jung and later analysts sometimes called unus mundus. I will map each experience, offer concrete examples, name voices you might hear in the mirror of your life, and give a practical sense of how to begin integrating what feels disruptive now. If this resonates, subscribe and stay for the map that follows. The first sign will feel like a private conversation with chance, and it will change how you read coincidences. Why this matters is simple and also enormous. When the ego loosens its grip, the unconscious finds new channels to speak, which looks strange from the outside because the language is symbolic and relational, not logical. This is why people are so quick to label it pathology. The mechanism at work is relational emergence. The self organizes its signals across dreams, synchronistic events, and shifts in perception so that meaning becomes accessible without obvious causality. Think of it as the psyche rerouting traffic through backroads because the main bridge is closed. Scientific disciplines call this pattern recognition and pattern completion, while depth psychology names the quality numinous and speaks of archetypal constellations. A practical example might be a sudden obsession with a single book that appears in 3 separate places in 2 days, or a song showing up at just the moment you need to decide. These are not random, they are invitations, and they often come at moments when old strategies have failed and new ones must be born. Before we go to the first experience, imagine the world not as a stage you perform on, but as a conversation you are invited into. Experience 1 is what we call synchronistic communication, the moments when meaning arrives without causal lines yet with uncanny relevance. Picture this. You are in a rainy station, the smell of wet concrete and old perfume mixing, and a stranger drops a tattered journal at your feet. The journal has the same symbol you drew the night before in a dream. The air tastes metallic, a train whistle hums like a chord in your chest, your palms are cool, the light is a thin gray that makes faces look like ghosts. You pause. You feel the hairs on your forearm. You say nothing, but the heart recognizes the message. In my clinical work with Marcus and Layla, I documented repeated instances where numbers repeat, books recur, or a specific phrase follows a patient for days. Marcus whispered to me in the clinic, "It was everywhere. I could not escape it." I asked, "What did it ask you?" He answered, "To stop running from a story I was born into." Layla wrote me an email about seeing a white heron twice in 1 week the moment she considered leaving her marriage. Jung wrote about these moments as a-causal connections that reveal an underlying coordination between psyche and world. Sensory detail anchors the reality of the event, the smell, the texture, the temperature, the tone of voice that said nothing yet said everything. The practical skill is to pause and name the encounter aloud. Ask, "What is being asked of me?" Name the emotion, record it. These steps discipline the attention and allow the message to be heard rather than dismissed. Experience 2 is the activation of the transcendent function, the capacity to hold contradiction without collapsing. This is the place where you feel pulled both toward intimacy and away from it, where you love and distrust someone at once, where anger and tenderness sit on the same bench. The scene I remember most is Elyse at a resignation party under yellow lights that smelled of frying oil and citrus. She laughed and her laugh sounded thin. Her hands were damp, a glass slid across the table like a small boat, someone played a tinny melody on a phone, the wallpaper pattern made her eyes swim. She turned to Jonah and said, "I do not want to leave and I cannot stay." Jonah answered, "Then stay with the not knowing for a while." Elyse replied, "How long?" He said, "Until the two of you stop fighting in my head." The exchange had 5 beats because something important needs time to be lived out in speech. Clinically, this is not confusion. It is a paradox that is generating a solution. In sessions with Dr. Rivera and with Amara, I have seen patients who previously insisted on either or now soften into both and. The social implication is awkward because modern systems demand choice, productivity, and clarity, but the psyche will not be rushed. The tension produces a crucible where old identity parts meet new possibilities. Learn to narrate the moral ambiguity instead of forcing closure. Let the body inform the boundary. Breathe. Feel the pulse under your collarbone. Smell the air. Note the way your tongue presses the roof of your mouth as you speak. These sensory anchors make the paradox manageable rather than destabilizing. If you are already nodding along, pause and share below which of the first 2 experiences has been most present for you. If you have felt patterns that refuse to be accidental, synchrony, and a brief sentence of what it looked like. If you have lived the paradox of wanting 2 contradictory things, write paradox and 1 line about the tension. When you name it, you help others find their name. Priya said once in a comment that seeing the word helps her stay lucid through the night. Rowan told a community thread that a shared label saved his marriage because both partners could point to the same process. Comments create a registry. They produce safety. Experience 3 arrives most often in sleep and in transitional liminal states. Dreams that feel like transmissions do not merely replay daytime concerns. They arrive with a clarity that insists on future action or a reordering of the present. I will not call them prophecies because the language can mislead, but I will say they are highly directive. Tomas dreamt of a narrow bridge and a dog waiting at the other side. When he took the job that required cross-country travel, the dog showed up in a photograph and later at a shelter where he adopted her. The room smelled of old wood. His sheets were rough against his calves. The dream had the texture of river pebbles underfoot, and the wakeful aftertaste was both loss and relief. Patients describe these dreams as numinous, a word Jung used to designate encounters tinged with awe and fear. In therapeutic practice, we differentiate between ego wish fulfillment and sentient transmission by checking for a change in action and heart. Did the dream produce new behavior? Did it unstick a refusal? When Elyse shared a recurring dream of singing under a cracked skylight, the dream preceded her decision to start a community choir that later became a local support circle. Documentation matters. Keep a dream journal. Note smells, light, taste, temperature, and any people who speak. Name the emotion, because often the affect is the map, not the plot. Experience 4 is about the reconstruction of the ego self-axis. It is a shift from a centralized familiar self to a plural presence that moves between centers of gravity. You may experience moments where you are both spectator and protagonist, where your childhood voice and your future voice argue at the same table. This is often humiliating and liberating simultaneously. A moment of tension can appear like a small internal trial. I recall a consultation with Amara where she said, "I feel like 2 tenants arguing over rent." I asked, "Which one is packing?" She answered, "Both want to leave, but only one can open the door." That conversation had 5 exchanges because the split needed to be negotiated aloud. The sensory frame was precise. The clinic smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The clock ticked with a dry metallic note. Her throat was tight. Her feet heavied by wool socks. The light on the window bar was bruised. The process of integration requires patience and ritual. One patient, Marcus, found it useful to assign names to interior parts and to write letters from each part to the other. Another, Layla, used breath work combined with cold water on the face to locate the edge of overwhelm. The danger is inflation when one part begins to dominate and calls itself destiny. The antidote is accountability. Invite trusted witnesses like Dr. Rivera or a peer group to reflect back your tendencies. Ask them to name where you are over-identifying. This keeps the plural self honest and available. Experience 5 is the emergence of a mythic life, where personal history begins to read like a story with archetypal roles. Now you start to notice that you are playing parts that have older histories, like the orphan, the wanderer, the guardian, the healer. This is not theatricality. It is a deep ordering where personal events echo universal patterns. During a field study, I observed Elyse move through 5 days where everyone around her unconsciously cast her as mediator. The coffee tasted like ash and sugar, the air in the rooms she entered was always a degree cooler, chairs creaked the same note, her hands smelled faintly of orange rind, and her voice acquired a steadier cadence. She met Thomas at a grocery where he dropped his bag and she picked it up, as if in a play. Names shift into roles. This constellates meaning, which can both empower and trap. You must learn to use archetypal energy without surrendering personal agency. In session, we read mythic texts alongside life events to locate motifs and decisions. When called upon to act, ask, "Is this mine to carry?" If the answer is yes, take measures to bear it sustainably. If no, set a boundary and return the role to its field. Now step back to integrate. These experiences are not isolated trophies. They are nodes in a larger transformation that has historical weight. Individuation is not a private ascetic task. It is an opening that has consequences for the collective. When enough individuals learn to hold paradox, listen to synchrony, and follow transmitted dreams, social structures adapt. Conversely, if these openings are shamed or pathologized, the material will manifest as social breakdown, projections, and disinformation. The risk is real, but the opportunity is too. You become a small lighthouse in a fog-bound coast. Your decisions to name, to journal, to speak with trusted others, and to practice simple rituals build communal capacity. Invite at least 5 people into your circle who can listen without fixing. Share texts with friends like Jonah, Priya, Rowan, and Thomas so they have vocabulary. Consult professionals like Dr. Rivera or other analysts when material feels overwhelming. The work is both personal and civic. Epilogue: Integration and Service. Elyse is not an idea. She is a person you meet at the threshold. Her backstory is part of the map, and worth knowing because it shows how ordinary loss catalyzes extraordinary perception. She was born in a small coastal town where wind and salt shaped speech. As a child, she learned to signs in the tide, a habit that felt private and strange. The house smelled of wet sand. Her clothes always held the faint grit of harbor mornings. The wooden floorboards hummed underfoot in winter, and her grandmother sang a tune that stitched memory to place. In adolescence, Elyse moved inland to study literature with Dr. Rivera and found books that mirrored the symbols from her dreams. There was a first love with Jonah that taught her both the sweetness of connection and the ache of division. She lost a sibling in early adulthood, a wound that both hardened and opened her. That loss made her available to paradox because grief refuses neat answers. She later trained with a small group of practitioners, including Marcus and Layla, and learned practical rituals like writing letters to interior parts and keeping a single object to ground during episodes of derealization. Each of these scenes gave her vocabulary and tools. In sessions, she named the voices within her, gave the hurt a seat at the table, and practiced saying aloud, "I can hold both," until the phrase felt less like a trick and more like an axis. Her present life is a messy integration. She runs a weekly circle where Amara brings tea, Tomas mediates logistics, Priya tends the notebook, Rowan moderates when people flood, and Jonah sometimes attends with a quiet patience that surprises him. These are not props. They are witnesses who keep the edge of metamorphosis from becoming isolation. There have been 2 moments of acute tension on Elyse's path that are useful to hold as case studies. The first moment was when a community member accused her of encouraging magical thinking. Elyse felt publicly shamed and retreated. The clinic smelled of coffee and old paper. Her hands trembled. Her voice was small. The light in the reading lamp made the room narrow. The internal dialogue spun: defend or dissolve. In 2 short sessions with Dr. Rivera, she was asked to read the accusation aloud and then to imagine the accuser as a child. The act moved the charge from personal attack to wounded petition. Secondly, she faced a crisis when a dream asked her to leave a stable job. The tension was bodily as much as moral. Her feet found the floor cold, her mouth tasted of pennies, the air was dry and the night thick. She negotiated in small steps, informed colleagues, and created a safety net that allowed her to respond to the dream without annihilating her material life. Both tensions were resolved through deliberate witnessing, embodied rituals, and incremental action. This pattern is replicable. Name the fear, ritualize the small steps, keep a witness. If you have followed this far, know the invitation is simple. Document, name, and share. Your experiences matter because they expand the visible field of what human consciousness can do. If this touched you, subscribe and join the community that collects and studies these phenomena. Share one short example in the
Synchrony, or paradox as we asked earlier. When you speak, you create evidence that makes it safer for the next person. The work is not to make certainty, but to build practices that allow movement through ambiguity with integrity. You are not broken. You are waking. Not everyone will understand you now, but when enough of us learn to listen, the culture will learn a new language. Do the small, everyday work of noting, naming, and tending. Be a lighthouse, not because your light is perfect, but because you keep trimming the wick. You are not alone. You are part of a slow, visible metamorphosis.